a John by any other name. I recently bought a book that catalogued a list of the great Christian theologians throughout history. While perusing this book, something that really struck me was how dominant, or how many of these people had the first name of John, or went by their middle name of John. People like John Edwards, John Calvin, John Bunyan, John Wesley, John Fletcher, John Gill, John Knox, John Milton, John Owen, John Flavel, John of Avila, John Chrysostom, John Goodwin, John of the Cross, John Miley, John Henry Newman, John Murray, John Walvoord, John B. Cobb, John Gresham Machen, John Piper. And wow, even the world's biggest selling theologically inspired book after the Bible was penned by John R.R. Tolkien, author of The Lord of the Rings. This list isn't even counting various other versions of the name John, like Johann or Johannes. I realize this is all unscientific, and I know that the name John was the most common Christian name for centuries. But I'd feel pretty safe betting on a statistical significance to the dominance of this name among these famous theologians versus the prominence of the name in the general overall population of Western Christianized culture. This got me to thinking about what God's Word says about our names. It strikes me as no coincidence that the Gospel of Luke chapter 1 seems to make quite a big deal of making sure that John the Baptist was given the name John, with God taking away the father, Zechariah's voice, until he sealed the name John upon this God-promised child. What might this also be saying, or at least confirming to us about the idea of voices and the silencing of them? Surprisingly, upon a quick Google search, I didn't find any direct, concrete evidence that God specifically names the rest of us common folk, although I bet it is in the Bible somewhere. How hard would it be for our God to put ideas of our names into our parents' minds? But would that be God effecting our own free will? I did find some interesting related verses. Like in Psalm 139, David says, "You made my whole being. You formed me in my mother's body. I praise you because you made me in an amazing and wonderful way. What you have done is wonderful. I know this very well. You saw my bones being formed as I took shape in my mother's body. When I was put together there, you saw my body as it was formed. All the days planned for me were written in your book before I was 1 day old." Among all of the things God knows and planned, I would say it would include our name. How else can our names be written in his book? I know that the name John comes from the Hebrew word that means God is gracious. I have no proof of this yet, but it seems the name John to God anyways seems to mean something like the voice or the messenger or my voice. And of course God's voice in this world would greatly and in millions of ways say God is gracious. In the Bible, the two most famous Johns are John the Baptist. We all know about his voice in the wilderness. And then there is John the Revelator, or John the Beloved, whose voice is very prominent in the end of the age through the Revelations. Throughout American history, we had John Adams and that famous John Hancock, whose name is so obviously and blatantly slapped upon God's other greatly inspired declarative document that changed the world, that being the Declaration of Independence. Even in modern times, we have prominent and distinctive famous voices in music like John Lennon, the voice of revolution, or Johnny Cash, the voice of the downtrodden and imprisoned. I add this part mostly tongue-in-cheek because I know there are lots of other very distinctive voices in the pop realm with names like Bob and Frank and Willie and Bruce and Michael and Neil and Mick, and one of my own favorites, Leonard. Hey, continuing on this line, even the most famous voices in football is John Madden, and how many of us Generation Xers were probably even conceived to the accompanying voice of that king of late night, Johnny Carson. But then, of course, Satan, the prince of this world, likes to pervert and have us even crap on what God ordains. There are many examples of this worldly perversion of this name, like the man who visits prostitutes is a John, or an unwanted man whose girlfriend breaks his heart is a dear John, or an unknown man or baby is a John Doe, and then even a toilet is called a John. There seems no other first name with so many dubious other meanings, not even Bill or Dick. This is all very interesting, I think. There definitely seems to be something to this name, John being one who likes to declare God's voice of truth. Of course, I probably wouldn't even have noticed all of this if my own middle name weren't John. Not that I am anything but a child of God, but this even seems to fit me. Anyone who is aware of my rights would notice this desire to announce truth. I even had a dream-death experience that speaks directly to this. It's in one of my rights. I think it is called the life-changing trip of a spiritual goof. But to give the conspiratorial sides of our brains a little exercise and a little stretching, what voice of God was being heard worldwide when another John F. Kennedy, was openly and publicly killed right in front of us? It is a well-known phenomenon that all of those conspiracies that rose up from this famous murder have, in fact, given birth to much of the conspiracy theory and the conspiracy theorists that are now everywhere and now gloriously exposing much satanic corruption and darkness around the world. Praise be to our most gracious God. It is interesting that Kennedy went by the name of Jack, and that another man named Clive, who also went by the same name Jack, also had his voice silenced on that exact same day. That Jack, of course, being Clive Staples Lewis, aka C.S. Lewis, another great voice of God. How's that for stretching? Would I be continuing that stretching if I pointed out that another famous voice, the voice or author, warning us of the dangers of totalitarian regimes and dystopic life with his great work entitled Brave New World? Aldous Huxley also died that historic day, November 22nd, 1963. And now to do some super-duper stretching of our conspiratorial muscles, so much so that we should hope that our brains don't rip a mental hamstring. Do you remember that great Christmas song that was remade by the Jonettes? The Ronettes? A song that is also quite a well-loved and prominent Christmas voice or soundtrack for the Christmas life. The ring ring ringety ding ding dingety song entitled Sleigh Ride. You guessed it. It was released to the world that very same historic day. Look it up if your mental hammy feels a bit unsettled. Perhaps our most gracious God knew since that historical day the kind of unsettling ride that we, humanity, were about to embark upon. One that, all things that I point out considered, seems to be bringing us, humanity, finally, to a great and most glorious and gracious gift-bearing season all of its own, and the death of that brave new world order. Perhaps a coming season that will make Christmas the celebration of Jesus' first coming. Pale in comparison to his next one, but I am digressing. Of course, a mantra of any good conspiracy theorist is there is no such thing as coincidence. Coincidence, the word that tries to shut up a conspiracy theorist, but I must go on. In that same light, the very term conspiracy theorist was coined by the CIA in an effort to derail and paint with a broad brush as crazy anyone who refuses to believe their official narrative. Is that fact just coincidence? To quote one of my favorite lines from one of my favorite miniseries, Turn Washington Spies from AMC, a great show about the American Revolution. In the show, the character Robert Rogers says to one of the main characters, who tried to pass something off as merely coincidence, Rogers so brilliantly says, "Coincidence? I've seen all manners of strange things in all of my years as a Queen's Ranger, but never one of those." To bring it all full circle to today, the name of a man who seems to be trumpeting out God's voice of truth by exposing political and governmental darkness, this man named Donald J. Trump. The man who coincidentally released or wants to release all of those sealed JFK documents. What might his middle name be? Yes, you guessed it, it's John. So what exactly is that God who is gracious up to right here and right now? Well, in this John's view, to slightly edit the words of John Lennon in his song Revolution. Another John who strangely and coincidentally had his own voice silenced, much like Mr. Kennedy's. You say you'll change the Constitution? Well, you know, we all want to change your head. You tell me it's the institution. well, you better free your mind instead. But if you go painting pretty pictures for us of Chairman Mao, you ain't gonna make it with anyone or humanity. Anyhow, don't you know it's gonna be all right, all right, all right. Those prescient lines are extremely pertinent to our world right here and right now. This is all very interesting, I think. At least interesting to someone, coincidentally, with the middle name John.